Hi, everyone. My name's Walt Woodward, and I was privileged to give the keynote address at the Connecticut Education Network Conference at the Hartford Convention Center earlier this year in May. And I've been asked to make a video recording of the lecture that I did. I truly enjoyed being there and meeting so many people and learning a whole lot. And I hope you enjoy this talk. Thanks much. Have a great day. It's an honor and a pleasure to be your keynote speaker, and I've taken this talk quite seriously, both because of the importance of the Connecticut Education Network and the absolutely critical role I believe you as its members can, and I think must, play in an unprecedented revolution in human experience about to change all our lives. When I consider the importance of the river of information you and your colleagues provide, I'm simply in awe. Through the Connecticut Education Network flows the intellectual production of all of our state's public universities and colleges, and almost all of its private ones. CEN helps educate and protect K through 12 students in every Connecticut school district. 7 out of 10 Connecticut libraries and a host of museums and community anchors deliver knowledge and culture via CEN. All 3 branches of state government and 2/3 of Connecticut's municipalities rely on CEN, as do 20% of our public safety organizations. To say CEN is a force to be reckoned with is an understatement. And your unusual status as a collaborative, nonprofit, member-responsive network offers you a unique role at a critical moment of change. I'm a historian. I spent the last 30 years studying the impact of change over time, the very definition of history. And in my 18 years as state historian of Connecticut, I learned a lot about the impact of change on this state and its people. I'm also in my mid-70s, which means I've experienced the impact of some historical changes personally, sometimes dramatically. Today, I hope you'll indulge me as I use Connecticut history and personal experience to talk about information revolutions Connecticut has experienced in the past and the mission I hope you personally and collectively will take on during the world-transforming information revolution that has just begun. Change is tricky. Sometimes it comes quickly, and sometimes it moves at a glacial pace. Almost always, though, change brings both intended and, more important, unintended consequences. That's what makes history so useful. With the perspective gained by time and distance, we can better understand what really happened and its true significance. So let's begin with some changes that took place just outside this building many years ago. I hope during the next few days, you'll have a chance to get outside and enjoy the beauty of the Connecticut River. Today, while groups like Hartford's Riverfront Recapture are working tirelessly to reconnect people to the river and its natural beauty, most of us hardly ever or never think about this amazing natural resource. I bet many of you crossed the Connecticut on your way here, never thinking of the water below. But 100 years ago, and for centuries before that, ignoring the great river would have been simply impossible. Like the river of information you manage for your organizations, it was central to every aspect of people's lives, and Connecticut as a colony and later a state was not only named for the river, it was focused on and dependent on this body of water for millennia. The first European to reach Connecticut, the Dutchman Adrian Block, sailed past this very site in 1614, and most of the settlers who came after him sailed up the same river. When their descendants sought lands for new towns, they first went north, not west, up the Connecticut. Everything of significance came by river. The river was the conduit of trade, commerce, diplomacy, opportunity, innovation, and in times of danger, both trouble and relief. For its first 2 centuries, Hartford oriented itself totally toward the river. Buildings crowded along the water, competing to be near the wharfs and docks from which the things of most importance came. Hartford's first city seal did not feature a hart crossing a ford as it does today, but a Neptune-like figure representing the Connecticut River, holding an urn of flowing water, surrounded by fish, shipping barrels, fish nets, and sunbeams. Congress designated the river city the Port of Hartford in 1795, and so it was known for the next half-century. How does all this connect to the work you do? Quite directly. Because of all the things the river brought, the most important was information, the essential ingredient on which all else it carried depended. Back then, and in all human history up to that time, the rate at which information could travel was completely tied to the speed at which humans themselves could travel. The Connecticut River was the fastest communications network available, and the transportation revolution that spread industry up and down the Connecticut River Valley in the early 1800s was an information revolution too. In the 1780s, John Fitch of Windsor broke the reign of wind over the speed of water travel by inventing the steamboat. The first canal in America was begun on the Connecticut in 1791, and in the 1820s and 30s, both Hartford and New Haven launched expensive canal projects to connect Connecticut and its river to Montreal. The first steamboat reached Hartford from New York in 1815, and regular service between the two cities began in 1824. By the mid-1830s, Hartford was a major port for sail and steam alike. People and information moved along the river faster than at any time in human history. But in the way of revolutions, and this is a lesson we should be mindful of right now, all that changed fundamentally and forever during one single decade. Just as a steamboat freed the high-speed flow of people, commerce, and information from its dependence on wind, the railroad freed that flow from its dependence on water. Two brilliant ideas, the application of steam power to overland travel and the concept of reducing friction by running metal wheels over metal rails, suddenly made the rapid exchange of goods and ideas possible from anywhere to anywhere at speeds 5 times faster than steamboats. Within a single generation, rail transportation went from experimental to conventional, and the very geography of living was transformed. Connecticut chartered its first railroad in 1832. The first train ran 5 years later, and by 1843, when Hartford built its Grand Italianate train terminal, the future dominance of rail travel was indisputable. And as a result of this revolution, Hartford itself changed. It turned its back on the river toward the new train station and the future that would make it one of America's richest cities. Almost overnight, the river, for centuries the city's central artery, became secondary. In this mid-19th century engraving, the emphasis is clearly on the train station and Hartford's showcase Bushnell Park, the nation's first public park. The train that brought this revolution in orientation is now the focus of everything. The Connecticut River has become, both physically and culturally, a distant afterthought. People stopped using Port of Hartford, and they dropped the old city seal, replacing the Old Man River with the deer in the park. The ways and the speed with which information was communicated had been revolutionized twice in a half-century. And yet, despite the steamboat and the railroad, the flow of information was still linked entirely to the movement of people. Ideas could still go no faster or farther than people could carry them. But that too was to change, thanks oddly to an artist. Let's call him Sam. Sam didn't start out to be a revolutionary. He wanted to be a painter. At Yale in 1805, he supported his education, drawing fellow students and faculty. After graduation, he went to London to study with the renowned Benjamin West, then returned to America to pursue artistic fame and fortune. Fame came slowly, fortune completely eluded him. But he did get the girl of his dreams, Lucretia Pickering Walker, whom he painted and married in 1818. By all accounts, their marriage was idyllic. While Sam pursued commissions, Lucretia cared for their daughter and later 2 sons in New Haven. In the Elm City, Sam painted celebrities Eli Whitney and Noah Webster, and in 1821, he went to Washington to paint a supersized image of the House of Representatives, complete with 80 portraits of well-known politicos. His plan to sell tickets to this wall-sized history and civics lesson was a costly failure, but Sam persevered. In 1825, again in D.C., painting the aged Revolutionary War hero Marquis de Lafayette, tragedy struck. Sam received a letter telling him his beloved wife, Lucretia, had fallen ill and died shortly thereafter. Sam had intended returning to New Haven that very week and was haunted for years by the thought that, if he had known sooner, he might have been with her. That regret changed Sam's and all of our lives. 7 years later, Sam, following a shipboard conversation about electricity, which had long intrigued him, had a spark of inspiration he firmly believed came from God. He conceived of a way to use the electromagnetic properties of electricity to send messages over long distances. And for the next 12 years, Sam, who we know as Samuel Morse, worked relentlessly to turn this vision of a telegraph into a reality. Along the way, his project acquired elements of other transformational inventions, collaborators, venture capital investors, competitors, lawsuits, and no end of naysayers. Morse gave up painting, investing every minute and every dollar to advancing his project. In the end, success or failure came down to whether Congress would authorize proof of concept funding. Morse had the support of Connecticut and former classmate Henry Leavitt Ellsworth, the nation's first commissioner of patents. Ellsworth helped Morse lobby for an 1843 bill to provide $30,000 to test long-distance electromagnetic transmission of information. Many congressmen ridiculed the idea as absurd. One suggested diverting Morse's electromagnetic funding to the funding of animal magnetism. Another said it would be better to fund a railroad to the moon. Morse's bill squeaked through the House of Representatives, but it faced a concerted effort to table it in the Senate. On the very last day of the session, a despairing Morse hovered in the Senate gallery until nearly midnight. Then, told there was no hope, he gave up and returned to his hotel. The next morning, nearly broke and broken-hearted, Morse headed to the lobby for a last breakfast. Along the way, he was met by a beaming Annie Goodrich Ellsworth, the daughter of Patent Commissioner Ellsworth. "I've come to congratulate you," Annie said. "For what?" said Morse. "On the passage of your bill." Miraculously, Morse's bill had passed without debate in the final moments of the session. An elated Morse told Annie she would compose the telegraph's very first message. Morse's plan involved sending messages by electricity, using a code of dots and dashes he had developed 80 miles from Washington to Baltimore and back again. More than 500 chestnut poles, 21 feet high, were set up 180 feet apart along the B&O Railroad line. Insulated copper was strung between the Supreme Court chamber in D.C. and the B&O train yard in Baltimore. On May 24, 1844, Morse, accompanied by Annie Ellsworth, her father, and other dignitaries, assembled in the Supreme Court chambers. Morse asked Annie what the first message would be, and she handed him a slip of paper with a biblical passage suggested by her mother. "What hath God wrought?" Morse tapped out the message. 30 seconds later, the message came back from Baltimore, and the age of information had begun. The realization that the world had changed forever was instantaneous. Newspapers across the nation expressed unbridled enthusiasm. The Baltimore American called the telegraph one of the most remarkable and astonishing triumphs ever achieved. Communications are now made with the rapidity of lightning. In a frequently repeated phrase, the Buffalo Gazette reported, "Time and space are in fact annihilated." The New York Herald said the telegraph had ushered in the new age of miracles, more astonishing and more wonderful than all the preceding ages of the world. Analysts across the land touted the magnificent benefits to come. All parts of the country would be united as one. Prejudices against people from distant places would be dissolved. Commerce would increase, invention flourish, economies expand, even morality would benefit. The country would be bound together by copper wires. These wonders of the week, the Herald said, these miracles of 7 days will change the whole world in less than 50 years. And change the world they did. Morse's separation of information from the speed of human travel ushered in a communications revolution that continues right up to this day. You and me, all of us, are its beneficiaries and its victims. One of the first people to capitalize on the implications of Morse's technology for the flow of information was a man from Wallingford, Connecticut named Moses Yale Beach. Unlike Morse, who wanted to be a painter, Beach wanted to be an inventor. But after several inventions in engine design, steamboat propulsion, and papermaking failed to achieve financial success, he joined his brother-in-law in 1834, publishing the New York Sun, a radically new approach to journalism. Unlike most papers, which then were sold by subscription at high prices to well-heeled readers interested in politics and trade, the Sun sold on streets for a penny to a working-class audience interested in current news, local events, and sensational tales of crime and scandal. Beach had a gift for this new journalism. He understood that street sales depended on timely news, and that's what he delivered. Beach vastly expanded the Sun's circulation, and within 2 years bought out his brother-in-law, becoming the Sun's sole owner. But increasing readership was not Beach's great contribution to the information revolution. That came during the 1846 Mexican War and involved a novel application of Morse's electromagnetic telegraph. Americans hungered for timely information from the war front, and Beach was anxious to be first to provide that information. At the time, the farthest south any telegraph line reached was Richmond, Virginia. Mexico was 1,500 miles farther away. Beach understood that for all its advantages, Morse's telegraph had serious limitations. The telegraph could only carry one message at a time to only one place at a time. So once a news report reached Richmond from Mexico by traditional means, the Sun was likely to face queues of messengers from other papers competing for wire time to send their news reports to editors. To circumvent this problem, Beach further revolutionized communications. He put together an express communication network using fast riders, packet boats, and stagecoaches to rush war news to Richmond, where it was immediately telegraphed to New York. This gave Beach's war reports a 24-hour advantage over other methods. But that wasn't the revolution. Instead of competing with other papers, Beach invited them to join him in a cost-sharing collaborative to collect and share war news the instant it reached New York's telegraph office. 4 papers, the Courier and Inquirer, the Journal of Commerce, the Express, and the New York Herald joined him, and the world's first mass communications network was born. At the time, it was called the Associated Press of New York. Today, it's just the Associated Press. and its get it first, but first get it right approach remains the gold standard of great journalism. Because of the AP and the Telegraph, by the start of the Civil War, strangers in many places were getting news reports simultaneously, and fast-breaking news had become an everyday expectation. Beach had advanced the information revolution through an innovative application of Morse's technology. But the next revolution would come through an innovation in the technology itself. Although Beach had made mass distribution of news possible once it reached the telegraph office, the telegraph remained hobbled by its ability to only send one message at a time. But a Scottish emigre to North America, one of whose first jobs was teaching hearing-disabled students at the American School for the Deaf in Hartford, set out to address that shortcoming. Alec Bell had intended to follow in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, authorities on phonetics and speech disorders. But Alec's inventive nature, coupled with his advanced knowledge of sound and music, helped him see new possibilities for the telegraph. He believed that by tuning signals sent over a telegraph wire to different audio pitches, multiple messages might be sent on a single wire simultaneously. A harmonic telegraph, Alec believed, would be able to send up to 8 messages at once. He began working on such a telegraph with the support of wealthy backers in 1872 and received a patent for it in April of 1875. Unfortunately, though, while the harmonic telegraph worked well on paper, it failed consistently in actual trials. Alec's plan to cure the single message bottleneck inherent in Morse's telegraph had failed. But by the time he realized that, it no longer mattered, because while working on the harmonic telegraph, he'd come up with an even better idea. Since it was now clear the telegraph could send signals at varying audio frequencies, why not use it to transmit the varying audio signals of the human voice? Alec and his new assistant, Tom Watson, worked on the second idea side by side with the harmonic telegraph. In the summer of 1875, the two men produced this ungainly prototype that produced muffled voice sounds. Inspired by this partial success, they continued refining, and on February 14, 1876, they filed for a patent for an improvement on the telegraph that included voice transmission. The patent was filed before any actual voice transmission had been made, but within a month, while working on the device in his lab, Bell called out, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." And the information age in which you and I live had begun. Within 3 months, Bell exhibited his device at the Great U.S. Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia. There, at the event of the century, he presented a more refined version of the Watson Come Here device, which, even though damaged in transit, won him a show prize. And though he shared honors with other exposition innovations, such as the banana, Heinz ketchup, and Hires root beer, the way the world communicates had changed forever again. But it didn't happen overnight. The scientific community was impressed with Bell's breakthrough, but the press and public generally ignored it, seeing it as a trendy toy. They didn't beat a path to Bell's door, so he decided to take his invention to theirs. Through the fall and winter of 1876, Bell gave a number of highly promoted public demonstrations of the telephone throughout New England to the press and public. The professorial Bell proved a natural showman, and though demand remained low, interest in the invention increased. The problem was that though Bell's telephone would let one person speak directly to another at a distance, that communication, just like Morse's telegraph, was limited only to those directly connected to the exact same line. People saw the telephone as a kind of electrified speaking tube, like those used in the shops and homes of the wealthy. One of Bell's most ambitious demonstrations took place in April 1877 and involved simultaneously transmission on a line connecting 3 Connecticut cities. Bell was before an audience noted as not large but highly cultivated at Skiff's Opera House in New Haven. His assistant, Thomas Watson, was in an office in Middletown, and Bell associate Frederick Gower was before what the press called a surprisingly small audience at Robert's Opera House in Hartford. After Bell explained how the invention worked, the audiences were treated to long-distance speech, musical, and vocal performances from all 3 cities. The program was far from flawless. Connections were lost, batteries failed, and speakers were at times inaudible. But those present were greatly impressed. Bell closed his lecture describing a telephone future in which the limitations of the single line would be overcome. In the future, he said, telephones would be as common in the home as gas and water. Their lines would go to a central exchange office from which communication could be established with the butcher, the doctor, a merchant, a neighbor, and businesses could conduct trade with those anywhere in other cities. This, Bell knew, was the key to the telephone's success, though at the time he had no idea how to make that happen. Fortunately, someone at his New Haven show did. George W. Coy was a Civil War veteran who, after losing use of his left arm in combat, had retrained as a telegraph operator. Coy managed the Atlantic and Pacific Telephone Company's new district office in New Haven. The district office system offered, as Coy advertised, a simplified home telegraph by means of which, day or night, the possessor can signal our district office and call at the touch of a key a messenger, policeman, or the family physician. The user would tap a certain number of clicks identifying the service they needed, and the district office would immediately dispatch a messenger to provide it. Bell had hired Coy to help manage the batteries and wire connections at his New Haven show, so Coy had a ringside seat to the telephone demonstration. Coy saw at once the phone's advantage over the home telegraph, and his district office experience gave him an idea of how to overcome the telephone's single-line limitation. Coy discussed the concept of a phone exchange with Bell and secured a promise of receiving the New Haven franchise. 9 months and a lot of machinations later, Coy and 2 backers formed the District Telephone Company of New Haven. We intend, its first advertisement said, to connect residences, offices, markets, etc., so that anyone may talk at any time with any other person having the same connection. It was a shoestring operation, and the world's first telephone switchboard, designed and produced by Coy, was made in part from teapot lids and bustle wire, but it worked, and it changed history. But that didn't happen overnight either. Despite Coy's assurances, most people took a wait-and-see attitude. The first telephone directory, published a month after the exchange opened, was a single-page listing of the company's 50 subscribers, only 9 of whom were residential customers. But through diligent marketing of things like call-in weather reports and live scores from sporting events, Coy attracted more subscribers. Within 9 months, District Telephone produced the world's first telephone book of 40 pages with nearly 400 subscribers. The rest, of course, is a history of yet another information revolution. 70 years after it began operations, the Southern New England Telephone Company had a network of 650,000 telephones linked by copper wire to 55 million other homes worldwide. In 1953, 70 years before the present day, SNET produced a comic book, a graphic novel, featuring their storied history and growth. The highlight of that work for me, one that teleports us into the information revolutions of our time, was the book's last page, in which they gave their 1950s readers a forecast for the future, a glimpse of the information technology breakthroughs that might transform their lives in the years ahead. One of the miracles modern technology was predicted to produce was a cordless telephone that could be carried around the house or out in the yard. The cordless phone arrived commercially 30 years later in 1983. Next on the list was a telephone that would automatically answer calls and record messages, a breakthrough that first hit the market in 1960 but didn't reach consumers until 1984, 31 years after it was predicted. A distant talking phone that would let you speak and listen without holding on to anything was another anticipated gift from tomorrow. It arrived in late 1958 with a microphone in the handset, an external speaker, and a lot of buttons and wires. Not quite comfortable predicting that it would actually happen in the future, the prophets of 1953 did tell us that TV as a part of phone service has been realized in the laboratory. It did arrive, sort of, with a 3.5-inch blurry LCD screen in 1992, discontinued in 1995, but became reality in 2010 when Steve Jobs announced that FaceTime would be part of iPhone 4. And the last prediction, not a great surprise perhaps to people old enough to remember their Dick Tracy comic books, was a watch-like device that would let people call anyone from anywhere, including the fishing hole. Of course, they reminded their readers many of these instruments are far off in the future. Well, that future is now here. The phone watch first appeared in this version that had a pull-out antenna that gave you an extra finger in 1999, but it became a reality in 2014 with the Apple Watch. Not bad prognosticating, 1953, but while we can admire their predicting these innovations, it's also useful to consider things they didn't predict that fundamentally shaped those they did. Things like satellites and the unimaginable communications capabilities they made possible. The first commercial U.S. satellite went up in 1974. Today, there are 1,832 of them. The mid-20th century futurists likewise did not predict the cellular phone and the wireless global connectivity that revolution produced. Nor, for that matter, did they predict the smartphone with its fusion of communication and computing in one device. But that's not surprising, since they also hadn't predicted the microprocessor invented by a 4-person team at Intel in 1971. Ironically, without the microprocessor, most of the advances the 1953 experts forecast would hardly have been possible, at least not as we have come to know and use them. And, having not predicted the microprocessor, 1953 also didn't imagine the personal computer, email, the internet, the camera phone, the graphical browser, the World Wide Web, or the app, all so deeply embedded into the advances they did predict that it's impossible, I think, for us to compare the information future they imagined in 1953 with the information world in which we have actually spent our lives. You and I have lived in one continuous, ever-evolving information revolution. And you, by nature of the work you do, have both a ringside seat at and a vested interest in successful management of this evolving, continuously evolving information ecosphere. And guess what? The stakes have just gotten exponentially higher. That's because the information revolution brought about by artificial intelligence, and more specifically, the world of large language model generative AI that exploded into public consciousness with the release of ChatGPT at the end of last year, will be orders of magnitude greater than any of the revolutions I've been talking about or that you and I have been living through. Though still in its infancy, the AI revolution promises to be different from, larger than, and more transformative than any of its predecessors. How do we know AI represents not just a revolution, but a paradigm shift for humanity? Consider the response to its arrival. Historically, most technology breakthroughs are greeted with modest enthusiasm, paired with a healthy dose of skepticism. Think of the wait-and-see attitude that greeted Bell's telephone, a hesitancy to adopt that also characterized the introduction of the steamboat and the railroad. Only Morse's telegraph, with its new age of miracles and annihilation of time and space, met with similar enthusiasm, and then only after it had proven its capabilities. Not so with AI. So far, the benefits forecast from the AI revolution include such things as total transformation of the global economy, an end to poverty and disease, a 50% reduction in U.S. highway fatalities, disaster prevention through early warning, and global environmental sustainability, to name just a few. The World Health Organization found at least 160 areas across 10 domains in which AI has already had or can be expected to have major beneficial impact. But in tandem with these utopian forecasts, the infant AI revolution has generated equally unprecedented fears about its potential for catastrophe. Historically, concerns about technology associated with information revolutions have been limited and specific. Steamboat boilers explode, trains derail. But with AI, with its potential to surpass human intelligence, it has generated fears of technology not seen since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Last month, Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, and over 1,000 others urged an immediate pause in the development of most advanced AI systems until safety protocols are introduced to devise and ensure that we're not introducing digital minds that no one, not even their creators, can understand, predict, or reliably control. The risk, they say, is nothing less than loss of control of our civilization. Whether you share this concern or not, the sheer scale of this warning points to the uniqueness of this revolutionary moment. Yet another way the AI revolution differs from past revolutions is the speed with which efforts to consolidate control over its development have proceeded. Railroads enjoyed a half-century of laissez-faire and nearly chaotic development before being consolidated into national networks by J.P. Morgan and Jay Gould in the 1880s and 90s. Within 7 years of Morse's invention, there were more than 50 telegraph companies in the United States. Only after decades of patent battles, technological improvements, and corporate mergers did Western Union become the dominant American telegraph company. Similarly, Bell's telephone company had to address over 600 lawsuits and competition from more than 6,000 competing businesses before becoming the 20th century monopoly known as AT&T. With AI, though, the giants of the technology world are seeking to dominate its deployment right from the start. IBM restructured its entire business model to focus on hybrid cloud computing and AI, telling shareholders they are the two most transformational technologies of our time. Microsoft committed $10 billion to acquire a minority interest in OpenAI, creator of ChatGPT, and has recently integrated AI across its entire product portfolio. Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, describes the pace at which his company is focusing on AI implementation as frantic. Tim Cook of Apple also notes AI has potential to affect every product and service that we have. Apple even while downsizing, is advertising over 100 jobs under the heading Machine Learning and AI. Mark Zuckerberg of Meta, the parent of Facebook, has committed to developing a whole new class of generative AI models and calls AI perhaps the most important foundational technology of our time. Google CEO Sundar Pichai goes Zuckerberg one better, saying AI is more profound than fire or electricity or anything we have done in the past. Information revolutions have rarely produced this kind of arms race for dominance so early in the life cycle of a technology's development. That so many giants seem to be betting the corporate farm on AI's future, even in its infancy, is another sure sign that this revolution is different, and a likely indicator, too, that we're about to experience disruption on a scale none of us have ever witnessed. All information revolutions are disruptive, and as we've seen, some profoundly so. Within a single generation, the railroad caused Hartford to physically reorient the entire city completely away from the river and made canals functionally irrelevant. The telegraph's instantaneous communication made the creation of a transcontinental nation of United States not just possible, but a reality. This picture, by the way, this iconic picture called American Progress, is often used to show the manifest destiny, the American trope of manifest destiny moving west. And this is liberty and progress leading the way. What I hadn't noticed until I did this talk is that as she is moving west, bringing sunlight into the darkness, she is carrying in her hand a telegraph wire. The telegraph's instantaneous communication made the creation of a transcontinental nation of United States not just possible, but a reality. It also helped turn the Civil War into the first truly modern military conflict with devastating consequences. Those are examples of the macro consequences of information revolutions, the kind seen through the lens of history and after the fact. But as they happen, information revolutions are often best seen through their effects on individual lives and the transformations, sometimes positive, sometimes not, they make in people's lived experience. Consider, for example, how the information revolutions I described earlier made whole categories of occupations superfluous. What happened to all the steamboat captains and canal boat drivers, the Morse code men and the switchboard operators? How soon did these folks realize their professional fate was sealed? History remembers and highlights the positive effects of revolutions and the way they improve things, but it's often quick to forget that change always carries a price, sometimes, and for some people, a very high one. Even if the AI revolution only lives up to a fraction of what is predicted, the disruption to life and work as we know it will be deeply profound, and the changes have already begun. I'm willing to wager that very few of you are working today in job categories that even existed 30 years ago. And it may be that 25 years from now, many of you will be working in jobs that don't exist today, or whose duties are radically different. AI will create a hyper-dynamic workplace environment where upskilling and adaptation are constants. Even as networks vastly expand capacities to handle the demands of AI processing, routine IT tasks such as software testing, network monitoring, and system maintenance are likely to become fully automated, leading, experts predict, to job losses or shifts in duties. As AI takes over the more routine IT tasks, you're likely to find your job focusing more than ever on the tasks that require human expertise, things like customer engagement, strategy development, and project management. Note also that throughout this period, demand for those with skills in AI development, machine learning, and data analysis will create many important new job opportunities. So clearly, there are job-related, some might even call them job survival-related reasons to stay on top of the AI revolution. But at the end of the day, I want to suggest that those are secondary reasons for you to become the informal authority on AI at your workplace. Your role at your institution is now more important than ever. You may feel that yours is a kind of thankless job, that the work you do is only noticed when something goes awry. And in part, up till now, that may have been true. But your importance to those you work with, and in fact to society as a whole, has never been greater. If the experts are right, AI is a very fast-moving train whose pace is only going to accelerate. It's going to make the information world we live in much more complicated and confusing, and the stakes in negotiating change successfully far greater than ever before. AI is going to excite people with its promises, even as it frightens them with its dangers. Most of all, it's going to confuse and worry everyone. Everyone you work with, everyone you know, will have questions about AI's potential impact on their work and life, which AI offerings to take advantage of, and which to avoid. People are going to need good information and advice from sources they trust. And the trust part is crucial, because important voices are telling us trust in traditional sources of information will be the first casualty of the AI revolution. Whether or not that prophecy comes true, in the super accelerated, highly dynamic information environments being created by AI, trustworthy information will be gold, and no one will be better positioned to provide the sound, reasoned, at the desk and by the water cooler advice people will need as you. If people haven't fully appreciated your work before now, it's because they haven't faced the need to make correct decisions about IT to the degree they're about to. Their futures, all of our futures, depend on it. That's why I urge you, if you haven't already done so, to fully immerse yourself in the readily accessible river of information out there about current developments in AI. It's a field that is literally changing every day, and society needs your help negotiating the rapids of change that will very certainly rock our world. Through your knowledge, experience, and reasoned appraisal of an ever-modulating environment shared with others, you can become the trusted guide through the difficult maze, the one who explains the issues, clarifies the promises, and highlights the potential dangers. And by helping your friends, colleagues, and family too understand what's happening in AI and how it will directly affect them, you'll help us all, both as a society and as individuals, to successfully manage the greatest information revolution in history and the greatest single challenge of our time.